I'm Natalia Muñoz, News Director for Holyoke Media. I am here with my colleague, Iohann Vega, Director of Media Engagement for Holyoke Media, and we have with us the Commissioner of Education for Elementary and Secondary Schools, Dr. Jeffrey Riley. Thank you for being with us, Dr. Riley. I'm going to throw the first question to Iohann.
Thanks for having me.
Commissioner Riley, thank you so much for this opportunity to talk to you. As we heard on the last update by Superintendent in Holyoke, Dr. Steve Zrike, on June 3rd, he made a statement that I think is really important, that it was, and timely as well, that was made. And it is based on the situations happening right now in light of the death of George Floyd. And the statement was that the Holyoke Public Schools is an anti-racist institution, and the superintendent noted that it was surprising to him figuring out that that statement wasn't made before, and he found it to be necessary to do in this particular time. So my question to you will be, as the commissioner and the person who appointed the new superintendent who is going to be taking Dr. Zrike's place in July 1st, what will be your statement on racism, and particularly your commitment to fight and to eradicate the institutional racism that may still be prevalent in the school systems, particularly in Holyoke Public Schools?
Well, thank you for the question. What I would say is, I've spent my career in education, almost 30 years, working to solve inequalities. Whether that's starting where I started teaching in Baltimore City, the bulk of my work was spent in the Boston Public Schools, where my children still go, or when I went up to Lawrence to work there. Because, we talk a lot about America being the American dream, this idea of a meritocracy. But that actually only works if all kids start in the same place. And we know right now that kids across the country aren't being given the same opportunities as other kids in the country. And we want things to be fair. And so when we think about what's happening now, I would argue that what's happening is just a result of this lack of fairness, that people aren't given the same opportunities, people aren't treated the same way. And America only works as if we have a fair and equal system.
So, Commissioner, I was reading the turnaround plan, the updated one, and there is reference, as there was in the first one, to bring in a multicultural curriculum for the students. So students are taught not only about sort of the standard things that public school students are taught across the country, but also things that are of their own culture, and that's important to have that. Is that a program that you would expand for the next 3 years, because we're still in that turnaround plan?
Yeah, what I would say, not just at Holyoke, but across the state, is we're always looking for ways to educate our kids better. When you survey high school kids, not just in Massachusetts, but across the country, they complain about two things. They complain about the food, which we're not here to talk about today, and they complain about, what does this have to do with the world I live in? I don't see the relevance. And one way I would argue that kids are more likely to be engaged is if they see curriculum materials that they can relate to. And so having those kind of materials makes a kid be more engaged in their learning. And so I think that is something you will continue to see coming out of both Holyoke and the state.
Commissioner, why was it necessary to appoint another receiver to Holyoke when you as commissioner could have directed the school committee to jointly make sure that the remaining the turnaround plan to meet those goals that you all set were met? So could you please explain why the necessity for a receiver versus having the school committee participate with you to find another superintendent for Holyoke that would do the work that you want done?
No, thank you for the question. I think we're just not there yet in Holyoke as far as seeing the academic gains and results we want and then making sure they're going to be sustained. But what I would say is what we have seen is real steady progress from the Holyoke community. I would say the school committee has been a big part of that, and Dr. Zrike as well. I think people have really worked together well in Holyoke to get better results for kids. We see that in the graduation rate that's gone up, the dropout rate that's gone down, some of the great preschool programming that's been that's been created and different things that are happening in the district. What we want to see is a little bit more academic progress, and there's been some, but we want to see a little bit more. And then hopefully we can talk about making our way out of receivership.
But Commissioner, still, why couldn't the new superintendent of schools be someone selected by you and also the school committee? Why was the school committee once again kept out of the process of selecting someone to lead the schools?
I'm going to gently disagree with that. I think we did put forward a process where we had both involvement from the public. I think we had 3 public meetings. We did surveys. We really wanted to hear from the community about the type of leader they're looking for. I personally came down and met with the school committee in advance of that decision on who we were going to hire because I wanted to hear from them. And before we announced it, they got the word early about who was going to be selected. So we try to keep everyone involved in the process, and we'll continue to do so. I'm very pleased by what I've seen of the school committee in Holyoke and their ability to work with us on behalf of kids so far. So that I think that bodes well for the future.
All right. So I'm going to come back at you again with the same question. But I understand everything you said, but still, if you're the commissioner, you still have authority over superintendents, whether they're receivers or superintendents. Isn't that correct?
That is correct.
So why have a receiver when you could have just told Holyoke School Committee, the mayor, who's the chair of that committee, and it just seems that working closely with you and your team to find a new superintendent rather than once again impose someone. And I was at 2 of those public meetings, by the way. I can't speak to how valuable they were in terms of you getting information you wouldn't have anyway, because really nobody said anything you wouldn't want from a superintendent anyway. So again, why not let Holyoke have that the authority to choose?
Yes, I just don't think we're there yet. I'm cautiously optimistic that in the future we're going to get there. I believe that. Remember, I came out of Lawrence where I was the receiver, and they have begun the process of transitioning to more local control. They have a more local board now, and they do have a superintendent, and that could be a next step for Holyoke. But at the time, we need to see a little bit better academic progress, and I think it's coming. I'm really optimistic. I think we've seen the stabilization of the teacher force. I think there's been some good early initiatives about recruiting more teachers of color to Holyoke and other things that I think will be important to get those gains that we're looking for.
Okay, for the record, I don't know what "we're not there yet" means. I'm drilling down on this because I'm really trying to understand. I understand that you're talking about academics. I'm talking about a school committee that's been elected by the people of Holyoke having authority on selecting the next superintendent. Is it that they are not there yet? Who's not there yet? What's not there
No,
yet?
I don't think it's a reflection on the school committee at all. I think it's a reflection on just the academic outputs at the school levels yet. We want to see a little bit more academic progress from our students before we're ready to have those discussions. I mean, remember, when I was the first receiver in Lawrence and I was given all the authorities of both the superintendent and the school committee, I could have just disbanded the school committee, and I made a conscious decision not to do that because I believe that people had spent their hard-earned money. I believe in the democratic process. We had, people had been sat on the school committee, and we tried to work with them. And Steve also didn't have to make that choice, but has decided to work with the school committee. And I think what you see is when that happens, you're more likely to get better results by working together than kind of working, opposed to each other.
Regarding the pipeline, how to get more teachers that reflect the school population. I recently had an interview with a teacher who had to take the MTEL tests 4 times because the hardest part for her, English is not her first language, was the composition and reading. And that seemed then like a barricade, no? For people who are excellent teachers, but don't have that mastery of the English language. Is there anything being worked out on how to address that?
Yeah, so I think a few things, right? I think my experience in Lawrence people have said a lot of positive things about what's happened in Lawrence regarding the graduation rate going up, the dropout rate being cut in half, test scores certainly improved. We added back arts and enrichment, we fixed the facilities, and people talk about a lot of different things that happen there. But what I've always said, what I thought the secret sauce was the fact that we were able to nearly triple the number of Latino teachers in the school system. And we did that by really aggressively recruiting our former students who had graduated college to come back and help out in the school system. And we offered things like signing bonuses. We try to put people on a higher scale. We put them in the NACA program, which I'm not sure if you're familiar with, which is an amazing home ownership program where if the average mortgage rate today is 4%, we were getting our new teachers who are coming back to Lawrence a mortgage for 1 or 2% with no down payment and no closing costs. And so essentially they were able to move back to their hometown and buy a property and spend less than they would if they had to rent in Lawrence. And so there were these kind of suite of things we did to bring folks back to the community and kind of rebuild our city to get better results for our kids. And I think that was one of the things that wasn't talked about. And that is some of the work that I've brought to the department here, where we are doing a large initiative trying to increase the amount of teachers that are reflective of our student population. We know that 40% of our kids of color in Massachusetts are kids of color in Massachusetts, but only 8% of our teachers are, right? Even though the research tells you very clearly that, for instance, one African-American teacher that shows up in a kid's life in elementary school makes that kid more likely to graduate from high school and have better financial life outcomes. And we've seen the data on it. And so that's some of the work we're doing at the state, including this idea of looking at the MTEL and looking for alternative ways to show that you can be a great teacher. So we are definitely on that. We're excited about that work.
How long does it take for those changes to be implemented? Say,
right. Some of those changes are going to come almost immediately. And so as far as teacher requirements and what's going to happen, and I don't have the information at hand, but we are doing a pilot program to roll some of this stuff out as soon as next year.
When I was looking over the updated turnaround plan, there's some numbers in there, some data that you wish to see. For instance, you wish to see a 75% graduation rate. Yep. Where does that 75% come from? Why 75% versus, I don't know, 90% or 95 or 80? How do you get to these numbers?
Well, I think what we did was we looked at kind of state averages, which are higher than 75%, but we also recognized where an individual community started. And, Lawrence and Holyoke were kind of in the 50s or even below when they first started. So there's been really strong growth with graduation rate over the last 5 years under Dr. Zrike. And so we wanted to set goals that were high, but also people thought were manageable, right? And so I think at the beginning, people said, well, if you've got a 50% graduation rate and when you say you have to make it 100% by year 5, you're just setting us up to fail. So we tried to find that right balance. But I mean, look, Holyoke's almost there. I mean, I think we're close to 75 right now. There's been really strong gains made in the community.
As you're aware, one of the principals here in Holyoke, the principal of the 2 high schools, just a few months ago was proposing a program to stop and frisk students. It was called something else, randomly search students for drugs or weapons. And there were at least a couple of public meetings with students. And there were some staff there, and the vast majority, like 99%, pushed back against it. I asked Dr. Zrike about it at the time, saying, why in the world would a principal in a city like Holyoke that is principally populated by people of color, where we know about the prison pipeline, where we know about mass incarceration, we know all this information, why would we do that to students? And, you had young women students saying, I carry mace, but I carry it for my protection, so now you're going to call the police on me? Marijuana is legal here, so then some people may have gummies. Now you're going to call the police on me,
right?
And yes, and I was saying earlier in another conversation, of course, high school students smoke marijuana. Is this why we're going to have now, which we do at one of the high school, bulletproof entrance to the high school? I mean, what message does that give to the students, to the families? And And so how in the world did that even get on the radar is my question to you.
Well, I don't know that how it got on the radar, the details of that. I know that it was never enacted as a policy. And I think because Dr. Zrike has really kind of encouraged during his time there for not just the community to speak up, but also the students in particular to give their voice, right? I think one of the things that we've never done a great job in education is listening to our kids, especially as they get to be high schoolers, right? We want to empower them to really explain their thinking. Now, there's always a delicate balance between safety of students, right, and freedom, and I get that. Obviously, this particular policy didn't seem to be anywhere near that balance we're looking for, and so it was not enacted.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. It was because of Dr. Zrike's work as superintendent of schools in empowering students to speak up. So many of them did speak up, and in this particular case, they spoke against the proposed policy. Moving to our new superintendent and receiver, Dr. Vázquez Matos, what do you hope he will achieve in the first 12 months on the job?
Oh, yeah. So my answer would be very different had the coronavirus not impacted our lives. I think what we're looking for first and foremost from Dr. Vázquez Matos is to get our kids back in school in whatever form that's going to be, because it may not be just the kids going back to school, but in a safe and orderly way so that our kids can, to the greatest extent possible, get back into the routine of learning. And so I think there's going to be some operational challenges about how we start school in the fall. And that's, for me, that's going to be his first task. The second thing I would say is there's been a lot of progress made in Holyoke. And what I've asked Dr. Alberto, as I call him, to do is to listen to the community and really dig into what's happened and not kind of undo some of the positive changes and then use that as your base to figure out what's next. So take some time to listen to everyone, to talk to everyone, and make a good plan for what's next, right? I think Dr. Zrike has left Dr. Steve has left a solid foundation for Dr. Alberto to come in and build on that, right? And what you don't want to see is major changes quickly that would undo some of that work. So I hope he will focus on the opening of school and then taking the time to listen and assess kind of the functioning of the school district.
Iohann, do you have any follow-up questions?
Yes, thinking about the appointment of Dr. Vázquez Matos as new receiver superintendent, you mentioned that you got that feedback that those meetings happened, and based on that feedback plus the review of any number of candidates that applied for this position, you decided Dr. Vázquez Matos was the right fit. I would like to know a little bit about what were those considerations you took between the feedback from the community and your own on deciding on Dr. Vázquez Matos.
Yeah, so obviously we really worked to try to get information from the community to inform us on what folks were looking for in a leader. What struck me first and foremost about Dr. Vázquez Matos was his educational credentials. He is not just a doctor, he's almost a double doctor, right? I mean, this is someone who understands education and scholarship and is beyond reproach when it comes to that. He's someone that has a real understanding of schools and school systems. He's been a superintendent before of a Catholic school system. He's been the deputy in Hartford. He has a background of accomplishments that, frankly, it's hard to find someone like that anywhere in the country, right? And so he just came with such qualifications. And what kind of put it over the top for me is just when I had an interview with him and he was able to speak so passionately about second language learners and what it takes to get there and to make improvements and to speak about his culture and his community and the progress that he hopes to make. And when you add that together with what we heard from the community about what they were looking for in the superintendent, we felt like this looks like it's a really strong match. And hopefully will be a great day for Holyoke Public Schools and the community at large. I can't say enough about what I think Steve Zrike has done. And Steve and I were principals together in Boston 100 years ago, and he was, just a fantastic principal back then, and went on to do greater things. And he's done great work in Holyoke. I mean, I think, the way the community feels about him, especially the parents that I've talked to, is pretty impressive. And we think that we've got the next person that's going to take us to the next level in Alberto. And I just, that's what I hope for the community and for the schools is, we think we've found a gem who can take us where we want to go.
Thank you very much for your time, for explaining to us the thinking behind how you select people. And you're right, what Zrike did that was so phenomenal. He's leading. It's almost as if some teacher were leading, not a superintendent. He's that familiar.
Yeah.
Even though he's at the top of the bureaucracy, he feels like he's on the ground. The kind of relationship.
And he's left a great team in place too. And I think, I think the best days for the Holyoke Public Schools are ahead of them. I would just say thank you for inviting me on. I know with the onset of the coronavirus, it was delayed a little bit, but I hope to be able to talk to you more regularly next year as we get going, and
okay.
we can stay in touch in the future.
Okay. Thank you very much, Commissioner.
Thank you very much, guys. Take care.